Okay, it is update time on the Nova. I'm long overdue for a video. Never mind that, we're not going to get into it right now, but we will in this video. This one might be a little bit long. I'll start you off with first changes. So what I did first, I'll kind of go through chronologically order of all the progress that has happened since the last video. So number one is I came in here and I had a tiny rust hole in this area. Okay. Well, I wanted to just do a simple little patch panel kind of like that. But when I cut that little section out and tried to do a patch panel, the metal around it was too thin to weld to because it was also rusted. So then I started hammering around in here, and that was also rusted. So I cut out a giant patch in the floor, and I patched it. Now, this took much longer than expected. One, because I did like an overlapping patch. Like, this piece overlaps like this much of the original floor. So underneath there's some original floor. Kind of like right there. So not only did I have to weld this side, but I had to go on the bottom and weld this side. So water doesn't get trapped in between the two panels and cause more rust. And if you know anything about welding the thin stuff, you can't just, zip all the way up. You have to do like little tacks, tack, 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 and then you got to go and connect all the dots slowly. So that was a whole lot of welding. Now let me take you to the underside of this patch panel, and you'll see where even more welding came into effect on just one patch panel. Let me pause and I'll take you under the car. Okay, so we're under the car now. Never mind that big green bar for right now, but this patch panel was right over top of a frame rail. This is existing frame rail. So not only did I have to weld it on the bottom side here, and because here you can kind of see how much I overlapped. This is up top side weld, and this is bottom side weld. Well, then I had to tie it into the frame rail, and then once I tied it into the frame rail, I also did like a gusset plate right here at this bend transition. So this is like a, 4x3 gusset plate, which gussets this patch panel. The light's kind of really bright. Gussets that patch panel to the frame rail. So that was a lot of welding. And I don't have all this like deslagged. I was using flux core wire. I don't have it deslagged or painted. So, but anyway, it's in. It's fully welded. I may come down here with the TIG welder and touch up a few small spots. But it's welded and braced. Now, after the patch panel was done, I also had a friend helping me a little bit over the holidays. He helped me remove that broken window. We didn't put the new window in yet, but we removed the broken window. And he did. I was able to teach him a little bit of the welding on the top side. The bottom side was really difficult, but I was able to teach him some on the top side. Now, I had said in a prior video that I needed to relocate the leaf springs. So I actually went with a kit, as you can see in the description. This matte Funkhouser Race Car kit. I really like this kit. And I was in touch with Matt, and he's a really good guy to deal with. The rear bar I'm going to show you in a minute. It comes with these brackets. This is a separate bracket sitting on top here. And then it comes with, this is a separate bracket sitting on the lower, and if you want a parachute mount, this middle stuff is provided. I opted not for the parachute mount right now, but this bracket you can see with the holes, it's really nice, and I'll show you where it's at. But also, it comes with, I wonder if I can zoom in on this. It comes with kind of a subframe connectors. So it doesn't come with this crossbar up here with the hoop in it. So don't get confused on that. But it comes with these little C channel bent brackets that go over your frame rail, and it comes with a stop. And then if you opt to buy the tubing, which I did buy the tubing, but I didn't use it. And I'll show you why in a minute. But if you opt to buy the tubing, it comes with this tubing, and then it comes with the brackets in the front to do the front. It comes with these spring pockets in the front. So now I'm going to kind of take you down under there and show you how I did it, show you how it's installed. And I'll pause and then we'll be back under the car. So we're on the passenger side of the car. This bracket right here, it's a C shape. It comes down, goes over, and goes back up. This C shape comes with the kit, and then there's a cap. It's just like a 2x2 square piece that butts up against here, because the factory frame rail has like a dovetail to it. It's not square back here. So you just clamp this up on over the factory frame rail, weld it all in, and then you weld in that cap to make this flat. So I welded all that in, and then this is factory frame rail, and the frame rail is pinch welded to the floor. Like here, what I did is in this area, I just welded the edge of that factory frame rail all the way up around to the floor and then back. It was pinch welded here, but I just wanted a little bit more. And then I welded this bracket that comes, this piece that comes in the kit. I welded all the way around the frame rail, and I welded all back up here. Now I didn't use the round tubing that I opted for. I ended up using 2-inch square tubing that I had in my garage, and it's about 1/8 inch wall thickness. It's a tiny bit thicker than the round tubing. The reason why I went with the square tubing is because if I want to do like a roll bar or some type of cage or something, and I want to secure it to this area in the floor, I can run gussets, and this is a nice flat area to run gussets from here to the floor. Like I may do a 6x6 square plate, weld it up to the floor, and then gusset it to this frame subframe connector. And this square tube gives me a nice flat surface to weld to. And I think the square tube is a little bit stronger than the round bar. That's just my opinion. It could not be, but I think it is. So this 2-inch square tube, I have them welded in. This, you can call them subframe connectors on both sides. And if I want to do any like seat mounting or roll bar mounting, I can do gusset plates off the side of this. Like I could probably do a gusset plate from the, because this is factory floor rail, I could do a gusset plate from here to here, and I probably will, just to strengthen the rigidity of the car. Because this car is a unibody car. It relies on the floor as being part of its structure. That's why I was going to do a bolt-in trans tunnel, but now I've changed my mind and I'm going to weld in the trans tunnel. And I have a good deal of clearance between the factory floor and the bell housing bolts. If I weld, I'm going to weld in the trans tunnel, and if I can't get to one of the bell housing bolts, I'll just drill a small pilot hole for access just to a specific bell housing bolt. So I'm going to weld in the bell housing. I had to go with different 90 AN fittings because I had a fitting that stuck straight out, but I had to go to a different 90 AN fitting so that when my transmission tunnel gets welded in, there's not any clearance issues there. Now, what I'm super excited about is I finally have a transmission mount. So those C-shaped brackets weld up to the frame rail. They come with the holes already drilled in them, actually. They come with 2 half-inch holes right here, and I think you can plug weld them to the rear factory frame rail, or I choose to use them to make my transmission mount. I drilled through the factory frame rail in those hole locations, and then I just made this transmission mount out of some of that tubing that I bought from Funkhouser Race Cars. This is just a metal plate. I cut it out the shape I wanted, clamped it up there, drilled the holes, and then it's the round tubing that I got in my kit. They would have made frame rail connectors, and then I just welded this long, flat piece off of it. I welded it real slow, so I made sure I didn't warp the tubing, and then it catches the bottom of the transmission mount. So I'm really excited about this for a couple reasons. I don't have to mess with the jack every time I move the car up and down, or I had that engine support bar on the inside of the car, and that's gone. It doesn't have to hold the transmission, so now I can start working on my transmission tunnel. Also, now that the transmission is in its final place, it locks in the angle of the motor. So the angle or degree of the crankshaft, the motor, and all that's done. So now I can soon start fabricating my turbo kit, because I know exactly where the exhaust manifolds are in angle up to the engine bay. I did do some touch-up paint in between my transmission mount and those frame rail pieces, just because I want to leave it there, and I'll get down here and get all this gunk off the bottom of the car and do my final touch-up. Now, in the kit, I said is those forward spring pockets, and that is like this metal bracket, and then this these gusset supports, and this plate, which this plate gets welded into the factory frame rail. You can see factory frame rail right here, and this is all factory frame rail, and this all gets welded to it. It also gets welded to the original spring pockets. So this was the original leaf spring pocket that held the leaf spring. This is the Funkhouser pocket, and then I welded my subframe connector to it. So it gets welded to the original leaf spring pocket right here and on the bottom and back up this way. He also supplies a little eyelet, an offset eyelet here. You can see that in the kit. The kit's really self-explanatory. I was kind of overcomplicating it at first, just reading the description. Once you get all the pieces and you lay them underneath the car, they're really self-explanatory. They only kind of fit one way, really. And this is the front leaf spring pocket. So now the leaf spring is relocated to where, the leaf spring, it used to run right here on this side of the frame rail, and that really interfered with tire choices, tire width wise. Now the leaf spring's way over here, and it runs in line with the frame rail, kind of, and it ducks in even more. So now we're gonna wheel over here to the rear of the car. I still have to do something as far as shock mount, but I think I may be able to get away with it a lot easier. So now this is the rear of the car, and this is that one bracket that I said this is a separate bracket than this bracket, this green one. So that really large eyelet hole up underneath there that I'm sticking my finger through, that's where the factory leaf spring shackles bolted into. There was a big rubber bushing right here, and then the leaf spring shackles. Well, the Funkhouser bracket, which is this bracket, it comes welded, pre-gusseted. It goes over that, and I was able to get a really hot weld on both sides of that, and then I welded it all the way around everywhere, and it's in there really solid. Feels really secure. I like it a lot. And then this is just a support bar. If you opted for the parachute mount, it would be in the center of this and poke off that way. But it doesn't come welded or painted or anything. All his stuff comes bare metal. You bolt it in, and then you measure for this length, and then you weld the tubing to this bracket, and then I painted it and then rebolted it in the car. Now, the other thing I was really excited about with his kit is leaf spring sliders. So when I was looking at relocating my leaf springs myself, the front was easy. I would have made the same kind of spring pocket that he made, and I got the front. But the rear was kind of the tricky part, with the frame rail tucked way up in the floor, and you only kind of have that one big hole for where the leaf springs were. It kind of got tricky getting over here into the floor. And I seen that Calvert Racing has leaf spring sliders, but they don't have leaf spring sliders that fit the factory leaf spring. Maybe they want you to use their leaf springs. I wanted to retain the factory leaf spring, at least for now, because I already have a lot of money into the kit and my Caltrax. So I reached out to Matt and said, hey man, I really want to use your leaf spring sliders with your kit. Can you help me use the factory leaf spring? And he said yes, and he actually made me an aluminum bushing that gets pressed into the factory leaf spring to use as leaf spring sliders. That's not part of the kit. That's not something you're going to see online. I mean, I'm sure he'll help you however you want if you just reach out and talk to him. But I said, hey, I really want to use your leaf spring sliders with your relocation kit, but I want to use the factory leaf springs. And he said, yeah, no problem. And he, I gave him some measurements of my factory leaf spring shackle and stuff, and he was able to send the bushings. They're an aluminum bushing, whereas the factory would just have a rubber bushing in the leaf spring in this eyelet. It's an aluminum bushing you press in, but these leaf spring sliders are really nice. A lot of the drag racing guys are using them. They make them for like the S10s and stuff. And Calvert makes them for a lot of different cars, Camaros and stuff like that. And I wanted to run them. They're really nice. They're on a bearing, so as the leaf spring gets flatter, it gets longer, and these just slide to accommodate for that long length. And it helps me because when I was thinking about doing all this myself without a kit, I wasn't sure how I was going to secure these leaf springs with some kind of... I was thinking about doing like an offset shackle, but that would have raised the car a lot significantly in the rear, whereas this might even lower it a tiny bit. I'm not sure. But this is the Funkhouser Race Car kit, the leaf spring relocation kit, and I liked it a lot. Both sides are done. This is the passenger side. Same thing here, and then same thing with that bracket up there. I welded it in on the sides, and I got a good burn weld on that big eyelet. And then back here on this side, you can't really see, but this bracket here is welded into the frame. Now the leaf spring slider and this kind of rear support bracket are bolted in using 4 bolts. And they're grade A bolts. They ship with the kit, which is nice. And then up front, I went with this bolt ships with the kit. I went with Caltrax up front, and I really like Caltrax. I used them in my previous turbo truck build, but also the Caltrax give you the front aluminum bushing in the Caltrax kit. So I have full aluminum bushings in my leaf springs, so I have no play. When I go to launch the car, there ain't gonna be any type of spongy energy from rubber bushings or polyurethane bushings to wear out. The Caltrax kit gives you a front aluminum bushing for the front of the spring. And I have my measurements written in here. I double checked my measurements, made sure that when I was relocating the leaf springs that, this center line, this leaf spring center line didn't get this way or this way anymore, because you could if you weld them goofy or put them in wrong, you know, one leaf spring could be farther forward than the other leaf spring, and then your axle would be twisted. So I really double checked my measurements. I measured the factory leaf spring hole, wrote it all down to different measuring points, and the instructions say to measure off this point, but I measured off a couple other points as well, just to make sure that I'm in line, you know, this way with the factory leaf spring bolt. The Funkhouser kit does drop the leaf spring a tiny bit with the spring pocket down, but up and down's fine as long as you're not moving the leaf spring this way or that way. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause and I'll take you out from underneath the car and show you what I'm going to do next. Okay, what I also did was I cut the inner fender wells out. So take you off the trunk. I'll kind of show you a good idea. So this is the inner fender well. There are mini tub kits online that will do this a lot easier and a lot neater looking, but I'd already put a lot of money with the Funkhouser Race Car kits and the Caltrack, so I'm just doing this myself with sheet metal. But this is factory frame rail line. And then kind of the same deal on this, on the passenger side. So all I have to do is sheet metal in, you know, sheet metal up, and then cut, you know, like a 3-inch piece, bend it real nice, weld it in, cutting in my corners. But basically I have to sheet metal in the fender wells. No big deal. Will take a little bit of time. But you know, theoretically I could get the car running and driving without inner fender wells, just to test like my transmission works and test a lot of things. And then come back in and later and do that sheet metal work if I wanted to. I'll probably just do the sheet metal work before I even get it running and driving, just to knock it out and get it done. But over here, when I cut the inner fender wells out, what also ate up more time than expected was, this is factory floor metal. Well, when you cut flush to the frame rail, you have the frame rail, and then you have a gap, a little bit of a gap, like 16 of a gap, and then you have factory floor. And when I cut all that out, I could actually like push on this factory frame rail, and you would see it move in and out. This factory frame rail is not super strong. It's not super thick. You know, it's not 1/4 inch thick. It's 1/16 thick. But by the time you bend it and weld it all in, then it becomes strong. Well, when I cut all this out, I cut out a lot of structural integrity. Because again, this unibody car, it uses every part of the floor, body, and fenders and everything. So with the floor, the trunk metal separated from the frame rail, I had to go again and weld all this, tack, connect all the dots, you know, sand it smooth. And I had to basically weld the frame rail back to the floor after I cut that out, because it came off here like 1 inch and it was pinch weld to the floor. You know, pinch welded, and I cut all that out to be flush with the frame rail. So I had to go back in and weld all that back in, and that welding took longer than I had anticipated. Now I have a question for you, the viewer. And so my axle is going to sit roughly here, right? Oh, these also came in the Funkhouser kit, which was good. I thought I was going to have to get my own axle perches, but they come in the kit as well. Because you're relocating leaf springs, so you're going to naturally have to cut the axle perches off and move them inward. So anyway, I have the axle is going to sit here. And then the bottom of my Caltrack assembly, which catches the bottom of the leaf spring, sits here. And then U-bolts sandwich it all together. Well, on the bottom of 63 Nova leaf spring, is just this stub. It's just, I don't know if I can get, I'm like really close to the floor. It's just a stub, like welded on. And I don't know if you can see that real good. It's kind of got like a spot weld deal to it. It doesn't unbolt. You know, it kind of looks like there's an Allen head right there, but there's not. It's just this stub. And if you look kind of real close, it won't catch the top of the axle mount because the top of the leaf spring is flat. It's just that stub. That stub will only catch that hole in the bottom of the cowl track. So what that stub locates the axle. That hole in the bottom of the cowl track will capture the stub. And then if the axle wants to move forward under launch, I have it offset because the shock's kind of in the way, but it'll sit like that. I'll have to do something else with shock bracket. But the only thing holding it from the axle trying to slide forward is that stub. And in like trucks and stuff, when you have a multi-pack leaf spring, you have a kingpin that is a bolt all the way through the leaf spring, and the head, the kingpin, is caught by the top and by the bottom. So my question to you, the viewer, is, do you think I should cut that off? First important, drill a pilot hole straight through the center so I know where my axle center is, like an 1/8 inch bit straight through the center, and then cut that all off, make it smooth on both sides, and do like a socket head bolt, like an Allen head bolt that's round on the top, so it would catch my round hole in the axle perch. And then down here do like a 12-point nut, because 12-point nuts are pretty round. They don't have the hexes on them. Do a 12-point nut on the bottom of the socket bolt to go into my cowl track hole. It just seems like that would be stronger than this weird welded on stub. Let me see if I can get it real good. Like it doesn't look, it kind of looks like pinch welded. There's no weld burn mark on the top where it's a full penetration type weld thing for this weird stub. I don't know, I was gonna get on the Nova forum, so I was also gonna send Bat Funkhouser at Funkhouser Race Cars a message, seeing what he would do with this weird stub that's just welded on the bottom of the leaf spring. I guess I could try it, and if it breaks, I'll know it doesn't work. But then that's like, if it breaks, you might be going into the ditch. So I'm gonna pause, take you up to the computer, show you around some stuff. So that's essentially the Funkhouser Race Car Leaf Spring Relocation Kit. And then the sliders do not come in the kit, so don't get confused. Those leaf spring sliders that I'm using and that he shows in the kit, they're separate. They're a separate cost item. But yeah, he painted his black. I painted mine green. If I don't like it later, I'll just change it over to black. But he says in the kit that it'll fit the tire that I want to fit. So that's awesome. And then, so here's the cowl tracks that I'm running. I said they have the aluminum bushing. That's that bottom piece I was messing with. The cowl tracks are really nice. This is like a traction bar device. It stops the axle from trying to twist the leaf spring, because under load the axle will actually try to twist the leaf spring, and the leaf spring will spring back, and you'll have that wheel hop and all kinds of craziness. I really like cowl tracks. I ran them on my previous build, the turbo truck, and it worked out great. But yeah, the cowl tracks, spring sliders straight from Caltrox, they won't work with the factory leaf springs, I don't think, because they have that right bushing. Okay, so what else have I been up to? This is a Ford 8.8 axle. You can get them out of the Mustangs, you can get them out of the trucks. I got my particular 8.8 axle out of a 2001 Ford Explorer Sport Track. And I cut all the original bracketry off. So, you know, it had an original leaf spring perch for the Ford Explorer, and I cut that off. It had like a sway bar mount bracket on it. I cut that off. And when I really got into it and inspecting it, I noticed a leaky wheel seal on this side, axle seal on this side. So while I had the axles out, I replaced the seal and the bearing. This turned out to be a real bad job. I'll post a different video on that later. This one's getting kind of long. But new bearings and seals on both sides. The bolts were rusted. This axle is actually really rusty. I bought it off eBay. But it has new bolts to hold the brake flanges on. And the great thing about these is, originally when they come, this pumpkin is off center. So this side is like 17 3/8. Well, this side is like 3 inches longer, so it's something like 20 3/8. Well, the great thing about that is you can take a section out of this tube and then weld it back together. So the section I took out, this is the actual section. I took it out of this tube, cut it out, took this stub in that I had cut off. I had all the brakes and stuff off it. I was stripped down. And then just welded it in. Now, there's plenty of videos on YouTube on how to shorten an 8.8. I'm not going to do my own video because there's other good comprehensive videos that do cover it. And what I was really worried about is when you go to weld this and tack it, this axle tube can't warp. You can't weld it even the slightest degree twisted this way or that way, because you'll burn up this bearing. You'll probably burn up the axle. And the videos online are really smart, you know. They just get some of this C-channel stuff that's made the same in the mill, and you just clamp it. I had 2 of them, obviously. The other one's on the bench, so I had another one right here, and I just clamped it really tight, and that holds the 2 tubes square to each other. Now I tack it, I'll loosen it, I'll measure from the housing to the flange, because the inside of this flange is a nice machined surface to measure to. And as I would tack, I'd wait for it to cool. So the video cut off. This might be a 2-part video. See if I can edit the 2 parts together. I probably can't, so it'll be a 2-part video. But before cutting the tubes, that tube over there, and shortening it, I also came in here and welded because the tubes are pressed into the axle housing, the pumpkin, and then they're just like plug welded from the factory. Well, if you weld the tube to the housing here on this side, it makes it a lot stronger too. And you have to use, the videos I saw, you should use ER309L, which is stainless filler wire, because this is cast iron and this is regular steel. And cast to regular steel without a good filler rod, the right filler rod, will crack. So you use ER309L. I couldn't find it, actually. And I went to my local weld shop, said, hey, this is what I'm doing, what do you recommend? And they sold me a filler rod called Super Missile. It's actually called that. And they said it'll work great, and it did. I welded it, and it didn't crack. So, but in the videos they recommend ER309L, but I welded it. And then be careful not to see how I have this lip of original center section. Keep this lip, because this is what you're going to measure to. You're going to measure to here, to this flange over there. If you just fill this completely in with weld, you don't have a good measuring reference. So you kind of got to know how big is too big of a weld. So it's kind of a tricky weld if you're not pretty good with welding. You might want to farm that out. But yeah, you want to keep this little bit of a lip that my fingernail's on right now because you want this to be your measuring point. So yeah, that's shortened. I'm going to put the rear differential cover on it and put it in the car. And now once it's in the car and it's measured, centered in the car, and it's on some sort of kingpin system, I have to put the U-bolts in, tighten it down without the brackets clamped. I have to set the whole car down on the ground. On the rear axle will be on jack stands because I don't have wheels. The front will be down on the ground with all the weight on the car and the car at ride height, and then I need to set pinion angle. So pinion angle is important. I'll need to set that once the car is on the ground, on its own weight, on jack stands, on ride height. I'll set the pinion angle and I'll tack these perches to the axle, pull it all back out, weld the perches. Once the perches are welded in, then I can paint this axle assembly, because this axle assembly is actually really rusted. I would have picked a better one, but this one got shipped to me by eBay. You can see some pitting right here that I'll probably go over with the welder. This is really rusted. But yeah, I was nervous about shortening it. I was nervous about getting that tube, a little bit out of whack. But it spins freely, spins really freely. I kind of spun the original axle in there before just to kind of get, a feel for it. I sat here and spun it for a while, 10 minutes, 30 minutes. And I spun this one, it spins about the same. There was no binding. I spun it with and without brakes. I took the drum off, spun it with and without. This is just the vent hole. Just thread the fitting in there. But yeah, that's the progress on the car. It's coming along. It's just, stuff like that floor where it was more rust than I anticipated, and it was a lot more welding than I anticipated on that floor patch. And then how I had to weld the trunk floor back into the frame rail was a lot more welding than I had anticipated. You can kind of see, this is original trunk floor, and it was spot welded like way out here. The original frame rail had like a little flange to it, and I cut all that out, so I had to re-weld the trunk floor to the frame rail. That took longer than expected. And then when I had a wheel bearing in this thing fighting me to come out to change both these axle seals and wheel bearing seals, when that stuff like that fights you for a whole day, that takes longer than expected. That side was easy because I had it cut off. I was able to get a punch and just punch it out, but I couldn't from this side. I had to get a puller, and I had to make my own puller, but that's like I said, a separate video. But the rear end's almost done. I put the rear end in, get it welded in, painted in, back in, bolted in. I'll measure for my wheel offset, order some wheels. I might have to exchange them a couple times to get the exact right ones I want. And then the rear end is done. I'll measure for a drive shaft, have a drive shaft shop make it. And then I get to come in here. Like I said, the angle of the motor is set now. On the stand, I believe the rear end was up higher. This looked flat. But now the angle of the motor is set, I can start doing my turbo kit. And throw my engine computer on it, drive around the block, brakes. I'm getting close, so. But that's an update on the Nova. And I really like the Funkhouser Race Car kit. It saved me a lot of time. I probably could have done, some of that stuff on my own. Like I said, the leaf spring was the tricky part. Yeah, I probably could have done the spring pocket on my own. But it's nice to go with the tried and true kit where he's done a lot of the geometry work. He's done a lot of the troubleshooting, the R&D, what worked, what didn't work. And that saves me a lot of time. Now, I may have to do a drive shaft loop. I was thinking about that today. I have my transmission mount in, but it would be nice to have a drive shaft loop. So I may come in later and do a drive shaft loop. And I believe just having that 2-inch square tube instead of a round bar here just helps me with fabricating stuff like a drive shaft loop and supports to the floor and whatever I want to do. But it was a nice kit. Yeah. My phone keeps cutting me off because of storage limits, so I'm really going to try to edit all these videos together so it's not a 3-part video now. But like I was saying, it was a nice kit. I'm going to wrap things up here. Comment below on that Kingpin. Tell me what you think. Yeah, that's an update. I'm excited. I'm getting close. There's progress being made. It's just not as fast as I want, but you know, that's typically how it goes. Thank you for watching. It's a little bit longer one. Let me know what you think in the comments. All right.